Hey, everybody, this is Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with us Jon Arnold. Jon, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, you're welcome, Doug. So this is what we would call in the podcast the movie business take two.
This is take two, and we'll start our sort of wrap up of Enterprise Connect 2024 with a common everyday occurrence for lots of people, which is I used this platform, which actually sort of combines many of the technologies you and I have been reporting on and talking about over the years. It's magnificent. It's beautiful. It didn't tell me that, unfortunately, it's sort of my fault. I didn't realize that we recorded a great podcast with you without sound. So this is by way of a redo, but I'm excited that we're able to do this today. I hope everyone sticks with us because we're going to hear a wrap up of what happened. And then Jon's going to share with us a little bit of the presentation that he made at Enterprise Connect. But let's start, Jon, with what you saw at the Revolution. I put on the scroll on the crawl here AI. It seemed like all my podcasts talked about AI, and I'm not sure if that was true outside of my little podcast area. Was there a lot of AI going on at EC?
You couldn't miss it, right? You couldn't miss it. So for a little perspective, I mean, the show Enterprise Connect, which I think is aptly named at this point, right? Started out, excuse me, being a PBX show, right? Because that's was the dominant technology of the time, and
Yep.
certainly big enough and lucrative enough to be the focus of a whole event. And that's where the industry was. And the giants of the time, they ruled the earth, and we needed to be there. And obviously, things have evolved. And now we came out of COVID, which is worth mentioning because, as AI has started to take root, it was emerging kind of during the COVID time. So it's now kind of blown on the scene very abruptly, even though, as you've said earlier, Doug, AI has been with us for a very long time, probably way longer than any of us realize. But, COVID in a way was kind of a bit of a camouflage because COVID was very much about accelerating adoption to the cloud. And that trend is pretty much established now. Yes, there's lots of prem-based business there, which is actually part of what makes a show like Enterprise Connect so interesting. But nobody's really talking about cloud now, Doug, just like aren't too many people talking about telephony anymore. So you'd like to think, well, this industry is kind of done and baked. And so, well, what do we have left to talk about? Well, it's certainly become more focused about contact center than it is on collaboration. And I think it's kind of like kind of 50-50 now where you've got to be paying attention at this show. But contact center is kind of where a lot of the action is at. You look at the show floor, you can look at the profile of who's exhibiting and taking up the most space. A lot of it is contact center, customer experience stuff. And what's driving both UC and contact center is now AI. And we have to remember there is no AI without the cloud, but we're kind of past that now, right? No one's talking about cloud anymore. It's almost a given. And now here we are. AI is dominating every conversation, probably more than the Informa folks who produced this show maybe care to realize, because the show floor is still dominated by vendors in the comms and contact center space. There really aren't like pure play AI companies. You could argue maybe NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA did have a small presence at the show, but they're not the big names, right? It's still the ones who control the communications and contact center pieces. But AI, I think you'd agree, Doug, and you talked to many people in those podcasts you did last week. It's the DNA through everything now.
Yeah, it definitely is. And when you were talking there, also, I'm going to pedal back to the contact center, and not only has the PBX sort of disappeared into the background, but we talk about the contact center, though the contact center may not necessarily have a center, and the contact may not necessarily include a phone call, right? And it's almost an intellectual concept.
Yeah, it sure is. I've been saying this for a while too. I think the UC market is pretty much, I wouldn't say done at this point, but it's pretty hardened now, especially with Teams being so dominant. And as I agree, it's a what's the word? An anachronism. Or even what's another word for it? Anyways, contact center is it's a little misleading now.
Right.
It's and again with cloud and now AI, the whole concept of customer service has radically changed, and I would say for the better. Frankly, it's a they talk about AI being a democratizing technology, much
Right.
like they said that about the internet too. That's for better or worse, I guess. But yeah, because the customer has so much more input now into defining their experience and their relationship with brands, it's a much more interesting space that way. And as you say, not every form of customer interaction happens in the contact center. This concept of a place, much like with hybrid work, right? We used to think of work as a place you go to.
Yep.
That's not true anymore. And the same thing in customer service, right? It's no one goes to a contact center. We may call a contact center, but it's really just one of many touch points now that brands and companies have with their customers.
Although, John, one thing I thought was notable. I don't know. I'm eager to find out if you found the same thing. I heard more at this show, and also a few weeks ago at Channel Partners, about the legitimate return to the office. I'd heard about it before, but there was a lot more conversation about either companies sort of insisting, and then there was also sort of on the other side companies saying we're going to make our office really an amazing place that you're going to want to come. And the other thing I was sort of thinking about while we were there, it's always good to remind ourselves that you and I and a lot of our colleagues live in something of a bubble that immediately around us, in fact, the facility that we were in, right, still has this physical element. There are still regulatory structures, for example, in Florida and anywhere you go, that say, well, every few meters there has to be a phone. Every room has to have a phone. There's hundreds and hundreds of applications for, ironically, very old school kinds of telecom, essentially, which are still there, still relevant, still playing some sort of role with almost half the working population.
Oh, for sure. And, we know the namesake of the show, Enterprise Connect, is, we think about enterprise as business, as workplace, but, that doesn't speak for the entire workforce. It doesn't speak for
Right.
the entire physical space because we have frontline workers who don't work in offices. We have a lot of people who aren't knowledge workers. And yes, when you get into physical spaces, the infrastructure piece has, it's also, of course, emergency services and elevators, uh,
Right.
any moving thing, escalators, fire alarms, all these things. And they all require some form of PSTN connectivity because the internet is not considered a reliable enough connection. It has anyway. So there's a lot of factors there that, again, the digital generation doesn't think about anymore because
No.
they just think the internet connects to everything. And
Right.
well, when you need 911 services, you're out of luck, kids. So it's more complicated than it looks. But we come from that analog world, and it's native to us. So we say, yeah, what about that? And then you realize it's a little more complicated than you think. There's a lot more moving parts here.
So, John, with that, I also remember that in our previous podcast that no one heard, you also gave us a glimpse of one of the talks you made at the conference. Do you want to share with us a little bit of that?
Yeah, Doug, thank you. And yes, now we're after the fact. So I could tell you that there were thousands in attendance, but no one can validate that for us, but that's okay. So I have been doing a talk this is my 6th year. I do an annual update on what I call the state of play, as this slide shows. Now, what I'm focused on here as an analyst, I'm kind of marrying two things. First being speech technology, which is a world unto itself, and AI. So AI, of course, has touched everything, and we saw that at every corner at Enterprise Connect. But my focus is on the impact of AI on speech technology, specifically in the enterprise. Now, may sound like kind of a backwater, kind of an afterthought idea because everyone knows about AI in the contact center. We all know about chatbots, right? And how every contact center player has an AI story now. And it's very much centered around communications, particularly speech, and how everything has to be captured for for building a knowledge base. But that's also the case in the enterprise. So to kind of put a framework around that, this is one of the slides for my presentation. I just want to speak briefly to two of them to give you a flavor for this. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for 6 years now, and every year it's different, and I'm adding a lot of layers as the years go by. So I'm not going to talk about the basics here. I've kind of covered that previously. But what I'm trying to get here is to show you how it breaks down in terms of like three types of fundamental use cases. So if you're a vendor saying, okay, well, where does speech tech fit into the enterprise space? I see this as kind of three kind of progressive levels. And the first is this, what I call employee base. So what we use as workers in our day-to-day jobs. And so this would be the things we're most familiar with. So it's mostly what you see in a UCaaS platform. Copilot for Teams is a really prominent example of this, where when you're in meetings, right, the AI layers into speech tech with basically what we call speech to text, right? Where all the conversations in a meeting are captured and then transcribed in real time, as well as translated in real time, which is a big benefit for people who are, global teams where you may have multilingual environments. And now you're seeing the kind of 2024 iteration of the Microsoft Clippy, which I'm sure you remember, Doug, from whatever would be been Link days or earlier versions. But now we call it Copilot. But it's the same thing. And if you saw Microsoft's keynote at the event, this is all they talk about now, is all of the wonderful applications that AI brings to the desktop. Much of it is speech enabled because most of what we do in our day-to-day conversations are speech based. So there's a lot of use cases here for speech technology that we're not even thinking about, but it's there. The next layer is more department based, line of business. Now it gets a little more interesting because instead of going from the horizontal of we're all in meetings, now it's a little more vertical. So now there are a lot of use cases that are specific to a function. Sales, marketing, HR, yes, contact center is one of them, compliance. These are big ones, all of which where AI can really kind of leverage speech technology to create a lot of ways to basically accelerate learning and training. So it's being used specifically in sales now. Every UCaaS vendor has a sales kind of vertical application here, and it's coming to marketing. It's already happening in HR. It's definitely happening in the legal compliance area, where you have very specific use case examples where the language, right, the acronyms, the terms of reference are specific to a function. This is where AI brings a lot of value add to speech, because now you start building knowledge bases. And that takes us to the third layer, which to me is the most important one. Now you have organization based. Now this is encompassing the entire operation of a business, where speech tech, now it's about how do you leverage all the conversations going on day to day into building a knowledge base. And when we start talking about AI is, of course, driven by data. And the more data you have, the more effective the applications become. And so now organizations are starting to realize this. And that brings us to LLMs, large language models. This is like the dominant trend now in AI, where you're using these technologies to what we call dark data. To how do you capture these everyday conversations that become basically feedstock for AI engines to fine tune and improve. This is where you start getting an ROI for AI on a much bigger scale, where you're starting to harness all of the internal workings of an organization and translate that into knowledge and ways to automate, and create new efficiencies. So now you've got some real interesting possibilities, and also, of course, to do company-wide engagement. I'm going to leave that idea. It's a little more involved than what we can talk about right now, Doug. But I'm just trying to show you, as you move up the ladder to broad-based applications of AI, it's much more than the kind of things that we know about, like translation and transcription. We need that, but this is for a much higher purpose that AI is taking us to, and it's only starting to become real now. And I think this is where it's going. So I just want to touch on that as a higher level kind of build for where I see speech tech evolving to. In other words, for you IT people out there making buying decisions, stop thinking about this as just what you do to make meetings more efficient. Those are granular things, but AI is already way past that, and we're thinking of much bigger scale applications for value. So, like every other technology trend, thanks. It's all about acronyms, and this drives us all crazy. But as analysts, we love them because it's something for us to explain. Um, so, 2022, the big acronym was CAI, conversational AI, and this is the technology or evolution of AI that's taken chatbots from being really crappy forms of IVR enablement to stuff that's more conversational, more context based, has higher levels of understanding, can handle open ended inquiries. It starts to make it more interesting. Building on that, of course, last year the big buzz was GAI, generative AI, ChatGPT being one of the examples. Now all of a sudden AI is giving us stuff back rather than just processing what we're giving it. And you have to remember, most of these technologies are focused now on making our conversations more useful for machine learning. In other words, we're not doing this to make our jobs better. We're feeding this to make AI more effective. So this is not about us. It's about making AI more central to everything we do. And that's bringing us to the latest acronym, LLM, large language models. And that's one example of this. There are also medium language models and small language models, but getting this idea that we're going beyond just regular transcription to looking at our entire language kind of hierarchy, where AI is now capturing everything in every language possible, because the scale of AI has gotten to the point now where it's cost effective for these big players to do this. And they realize the value of when you can capture everything from a language in every language, you're creating almost like a universal environment. And it's pretty good. One reference I want to leave with everybody today is this last thing in blue. It says no language left behind. That's an important initiative from Meta from a couple of years ago. But all of the speech tech vendors are going down this path. And I hate to say it, but it's not about enabling us to be better communicators in the real world. It's really about creating a universal environment that get us into the metaverse. You have to remember, this is bigger than just making meetings more effective. There's a lot more going on when AI starts to dominate the world of speech tech. And this is just a taste of kind of where all this is going. I should also finally add, Doug, that I was not just presenting on this session. I had speakers from 3 vendors to kind of help give us a reality check on this. So I had speakers from Sprinkler, Ring Central, and who was the third one? Thank you very much. There you go, Cognigy. So Alan, Abhishek, and Ram were my kind of cohorts on this panel, and they brought a lot of real-world insights from what the vendors are actually doing. And we had audience participation with questions. It was really good, and we could have gone on for hours, just like we are right now, Doug. So I better stop talking and give the floor back. I yield the floor back to you, sir.
No, that was really interesting. That was exactly what I think everybody wanted. A little taste of understand what you experienced and saw at the conference, and a kind of glimpse of the presentation. And that's also a good reason not to miss Enterprise Connect, because that's the type of content you get.
I'll second that. There were certainly many other very strong presentations there, and you covered a lot of them in your podcast during the show as well. So yeah, in other words, you got to be there, right? I mean, our sessions, for example, aren't recorded. The keynotes are recorded, yes, but you got to be there to get this kind of content. That's worth kind of, shouting out again. To be there, that's where you get the best experience and value from everything that's coming from this community.
No, I agree, and this is just a very speculative thing to close up today's podcast, and hope I'm not taking you by surprise. But you have a just an inkling of what we might see next year at Enterprise Connect?
Well, I think there's a need to focus a little more on on AI as again that DNA. Now there was talk, Doug. I think you might have heard more too that they're looking at a second show that's going to be AI focused that they want to hold out in the Silicon Valley. I don't know how public that stuff is, but there's clearly enough kind of, I hate to say it, but disruption coming from this AI tsunami that's causing every show out there to, I think, rethink its priorities. So I do think you will see more AI flavor next year. And I still think we need more about this hybrid work scenario. Like you say, some companies are really making it work to be in the office. Some are really struggling with it. And until you settle that, I don't know how you make good long-term buying decisions with technologies. I mean, it's like you got to hedge your bets a little and buy stuff, invest in capabilities that allow you to support, you're burning candle at both ends, so to speak. But as you say, you've got to make that office experience so good that they have to come in. It's like going to a drive-in movie, right? You can't replicate that experience anywhere. So you got to be there, but also to cater to the realities that so many people really can function perfectly well at home and still feel connected enough to your organization to make it, to make that dance kind of work, because it's really tricky.
I'm struck by what you said just now in the maybe two or three things that we find continuity in, as opposed to the things which are disruptive, and that is that the decision in this organization, I'm talking about Enterprise Connect, to switch from, I think it was called PBX something and Voice something or whatever it was called, to Enterprise. The Enterprise continues. So, the one piece of continuity is the needs of a business and the needs of a large organization, a government, a state agency, an NGO or whatever. They remain in some ways continuous and the same over time. They need to reach out to partners and patients, employees, employers, and different people, right? They need to be able to communicate. AI, you and I have been sort of bantering about this a little bit, even with the discussion about, Hal from the 2001 movie, sort of the bad AI and the good AI, right? And me, I'm just wondering whether it's another tool in the toolkit and it will, help us do things.
Yeah. Well, for doing predictions about 2024 late last year, one of my kind of pet peeves is there will be some AI pushback this year. And I think that will factor in to 2025 a little bit in terms of we need guardrails. Like for people to trust AI, like this year, AI becomes more real than it ever has been before, which is great. We want those proof points, yes, but also, where are the boundaries? And I think we're going to need a lot more of that. So I would expect to see next year maybe a little bit more content around that. So where I'm pointing to right now is the EU AI Act, which came into law during the same time as Enterprise Connect, around mid-March or so. So it's actually happening, and it's already impacting the way AI players and comms players are going to market in the EU. And the US has its own regulatory issues that it's behind. And I think we have to look to that EU model and say, well, where can we learn from this and bring some of that in? Because if it stays Wild West, I just think AI can. It'll be very hard to justify long-term, ongoing investment if we're not seeing a good ROI or if it's doing more harm than good, right?
Jeff Pulver was also at our little podcast station. You saw Jeff and so on. What you just said. Are you starting to anticipate that maybe we'll have a Pulver moment with AI? Because Jeff's ability to move regulators years ago to define VoIP in a special way created the industry that we live in.
Yes, I wrote about this earlier, and Jeff is having his own event in next month. This month, April. I'm sorry, out in the West Coast, and his next iteration of On Evolution. which I would normally go to and speak at, but I can't this year. But I would be advocating, when you talk about 2025 for Enterprise Connect, I would advocate that Jeff be a speaker at next year's event, because he is a guy who has that vision. Like you say, someone's got to kind of step up and be that person to make it happen. I'm not saying he does that for AI in our industry here, but yes, I totally agree. We need something like that to kind of make it real and distill it into something, because everyone has those same underlying concerns. One of my mantras about this is we call AI artificial intelligence now, and that term artificial kind of makes us feel good, Doug, that kind of like we're still in control, right? But AI eventually, if we put too much stock in it, is going to be, controlling it. At which point we're going to be subservient. Now I'm being a little dark about that, but there will come a time when we're going to stop calling it artificial intelligence, and basically when it's smarter than us, we're going to call it, just like out of 2001, we're going to call it, I think, advanced intelligence. You heard it here first. Advanced
Or
intelligence.
or we'll just call it HAL.
Or call it HAL. Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Advanced intelligence. Hey, listen, that on that note, and just a little bit of a glimpse of the future, Jon Arnold, everybody. Jon, where can we learn more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. So if you don't know, folks, I'm an independent technology analyst. We're a small tribe in the analyst community, and I've been doing this about, just not as long as you, Doug, but 20ish years. So the starting point is I have a website, jarnoldassociates.com. So I'm old school. I have a website, I have a blog. I also publish a monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to in 2 seconds, and a monthly podcast called Watch This Space. You can see it all on my website. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well, Doug. So not hard to find for sure. And always here answering questions, and love to talk about this. And yes, this is kind of what I do to make a living. So I do a lot of speaking and writing about these topics, and always interested to hear from people who want to hear more.
Well, Jon, really amazing. Thank you very much. Thanks for the look at and the wrap here on the Enterprise Connect 2024. Jon Arnold, everybody.
Okay. Thanks everybody for listening. Yeah, Doug, always good to be on your podcast. Happy to be here.